If you had $250,000 right now, what would you do? Have you ever thought about it? Most of us would buy a car, put down a deposit on a house, maybe take a world tour. But what if I told you that in a corner of the world, babies are born instantly worth this amount on paper, and their families don't touch a single penny of this money? Would you believe it? Today I'm going to tell you about humanity's greatest economic experiment, and I assure you this is not just a story about money. This is a story about human nature, about discipline, and about how a nation was able to say no to itself. Close your eyes and imagine yourself in freezing cold for a moment, but not the kind where you forget your coat. I'm talking about an existential freeze that seeps into your bones. Norway, a place where for 6 months of the year, even the sun gives up on you. Every day, the same thing: potatoes and some herring if you're lucky that day. Your neighbor Sweden is rich. They have cars, factories, everything. What do you have? Fish, trees, and a deep sense of loneliness ingrained in you. Now snap your fingers and come to today. A baby born in the same country is instantly worth over $250,000, and the country's treasury has more money than you can imagine. How did this happen? Did they get rich overnight? So why aren't they spending this money? The answer to these questions will shock you, because this is not a fairy tale. It's real, and it starts with a lie. Let's immediately demolish a myth, because you hear it all the time. Norway was a third world country before oil, but that's completely wrong. Yes, they were poor, but being Scandinavia's poor cousin is something else entirely. Imagine you go to a bar in Oslo in 1955. Plain, bleak, conservative atmosphere. The government obsessed with post-war reconstruction. For example, you needed a permit to buy a car. Yes, you heard that right. Until 1960, you got approval from the state to buy a car. Luxury was a dirty word. The economy was built on three things: cutting trees, extracting rocks, and casting nets into the freezing ocean to catch fish. These were hard, dangerous, backbreaking jobs. This is exactly where history's dark humor kicks in, and I'm sure it will shock you. In 1958, the Norwegian Geological Survey, meaning PhD experts, wrote a letter to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and what do they say? I quote, "The possibility of coal, oil, or sulfur on the Norwegian continental shelf can be disregarded." This was perhaps the worst professional prediction in economic history. Back then, when Norway looked at the North Sea, they only saw trouble: stormy, dark, violent. A merciless body of water swallowing ships and sailors. A huge graveyard, not a vault. But while you were eating your potato and blindly trusting the geologists, incredible things were happening in the south. In 1959, the Dutch discovered the Groningen gas field, and this was massive. It was Europe's largest natural gas field. Here's the thing: geology doesn't care about borders. If there's gas in the Netherlands and the rock formations extend north, there could be something under that angry, wavy Norwegian Ocean too, right? This is exactly when the sharks enter the scene. In the early 1960s, international oil giants, American companies like Phillips Petroleum and Esso, started prowling around. They approached Norway, like wolves watching a sheep sitting on a gold mine it doesn't know about. Their offer was very casual, very sincere. "Let us take the rights to explore your ocean. We'll pay you a small fee. We'll take all the oil, deal." They thought they were dealing with provincial fishermen. They thought they could buy the entire Norwegian continental shelf for the price of a used car. But they forgot something important. Norwegians might have been poor, but they weren't stupid, and they had a secret weapon. Jens Evensen, remember this name, because this man changed history. He wasn't a geologist, he was a bureaucrat. But when the oil companies came knocking, he noticed something very important. The international laws about who owned the ocean floor were unclear, murky. What did he do? He unilaterally declared that Norway owned everything, declared sovereignty over the continental shelf, and this was an incredibly bold move. He drew an imaginary line in the middle of the North Sea and said, "Everything on this side is mine." But since no one really knew if there was oil there, the rest of the world shrugged and said, "Okay, Jens, enjoy your wet rocks." The stage was thus set: a rigid, somewhat socialist, austere government, arrogant, powerful American oil companies, and a freezing ocean that local experts swore was empty. For the next few years, the experts seemed right. Oil companies drilled and found nothing, drilled again, and still empty dry wells one after another. Millions of dollars were being thrown into the fire. Morale was gloomy. Despair hung in the air. By the summer of 1969, the oil companies were exhausted. They were packing up, preparing their suitcases. The Norwegian oil dream was over before it began. But you know, an old saying says it's always darkest just before dawn, and the most hopeless moments are pregnant with the greatest miracles. Late 1969, the chaotic 60s ending, Beatles breaking up. America put a man on the moon, and in the North Sea, everyone is unhappy, frozen, tired. Phillips Petroleum had drilled 37 holes. 37. Can you imagine how much money that cost? Astronomical amounts in 1969 money. It was a total massacre. They went to the Norwegian government and said, "We're leaving. We're breaking the contract." But the Norwegian government looked at the contract and pointed to a clause. That clause said, if you leave now, you have to pay a large penalty fee to the state. Phillips did the math and reached an incredible conclusion. Drilling one last hole they knew would be empty was actually cheaper than paying the exit penalty. Do you feel the level of indifference here? They were drilling purely out of spite and contractual obligation. They sent a platform called Ocean Viking to a place called Block 2/4. The crew on the platform didn't want to be there. Who would? It was December, and the North Sea in December is hell on earth. 50-foot waves, freezing downpour, 20 hours of darkness a day, devastating winds. They just wanted to go home for Christmas, be with their families. They started drilling reluctantly, mechanically. Suddenly, pressure gauges started rising, wildly. Mud analysts noticed something unusual. On December 23rd, exactly one day before Christmas Eve, think about the timing. They pulled the test. It wasn't dry. It wasn't just a little oil either. They had found a monster. They had drilled a hole right into the heart of the Ekofisk field, still one of the largest offshore oil basins ever discovered. We're talking billions of barrels. Billions. The telegraph went to Phillips' headquarters in Oklahoma, and it was so incredible that executives thought it was a Christmas joke. Merry Christmas, we found the mother lode. Now imagine you're a Norwegian politician on Christmas morning. You wake up, you drink your coffee, maybe open a small gift, and then you get a phone call telling you that your nation, which has survived on timber and fish for centuries, is now basically sitting on a waterfall of liquid cash. The scale of Ekofisk was terrifying, overwhelming. It wasn't just good news. It was a complete tsunami of economic consequences. What do most countries do when they find this much oil? They panic in the wrong direction. They see dollar signs. Politicians start buying yachts. The military starts buying tanks. The currency skyrockets, killing all other industries. This is called the resource curse, or Dutch disease. Look at Venezuela, oil-rich for years now. Look at their state. Look at Nigeria. Same story. Finding oil is usually the worst thing that can happen to a developing democracy because it breeds corruption, laziness, and ultimate collapse. Norway stood on the edge of this precipice in 1970. In a dangerous balance, they had won the lottery ticket, but also had a gun to their heads. If they let the Americans extract oil on American terms, Norway would get crumbs while Texas got rich. If they wanted to nationalize everything too quickly, but didn't know how to do the drilling, they would mess it up. They needed a plan, and a very quick plan, because the sharks were circling again. But this time, not arrogant, but predatory. They knew what was down there now. This is where the story becomes truly cinematic. Norway needed a hero, a savior, but they didn't bring a warrior or king to their side for support. They brought a polite, soft-spoken Iraqi geologist named Farouk Al-Qasim. You've probably never heard his name, but he is arguably the most valuable immigrant in European history in the world. Farouk came to Norway not for oil but for love. How romantic, isn't it? He had married a Norwegian woman and moved to Oslo to care for his son who had cerebral palsy. When the first oil samples came in, he was going to all the institutions asking this question, do you need a geologist? Norwegians who still barely knew what a barrel of oil looked like almost grabbed him by the arm and dragged him inside. Do we need a geologist? Please come in, sit down, never leave. Farouk Al-Qasim sat with Norwegian bureaucrats and asked a simple but profound question. This question would change everything. Do you want to be an oil country or a country with oil? Sounds like semantics, doesn't it? But this question determined the difference between salvation and destruction. He told them oil companies would try to rush them, hide data, play tricks, that Norway needed to build its own competence, its own state oil company, and its own rules, or they would be eaten alive. He said it plainly. Together, they drafted a document known as the 10 Oil Commandments. This wasn't just legislation. This was an economic declaration of independence from corporate interests to public hands. It was adopted in 1971, and the stage was thus set for the greatest wealth transfer the world has seen. But writing the commandments is one thing. Enforcing them against the most powerful companies on the planet was an entirely different fight. Norway had oil, but remember, they had no idea how to get it out of the ground, zero knowledge. They had no technology, no platforms, no engineers. All they had was Jens Evenson's legal papers and Farouk al-Qasim's brilliant brain. This is the moment most countries surrender, the moment they kneel. But what do oil companies usually say? Look, we're doing all the work, so we'll take 90% of the profit. You take 10% and be grateful. Norway said no, clearly no. Instead, they did something that made capitalists in New York and London spit out their coffee. In 1972, they founded Statoil, the company now known as Equinor. This wasn't just a company. It was a perfect fusion of a spy agency, a university, and a vault. The government gave foreign oil companies a very clear message. Want to drill here? Okay, no problem, but you have to take Statoil as a partner. You'll pay 50% of the costs, but you'll share your technology with them. Teach them everything you know. Imagine you run a bakery, a successful bakery. A foreigner comes and says, I'll work here. You'll pay my salary and teach me your secret recipes. Eventually, I'll open my own bakery next door and put you out of business. That's basically what Norway did. An incredibly bold move. State-sponsored corporate espionage, completely legal, and everything out in the open. Then came the taxes, and oh, what taxes! In most places, corporate tax is maybe around 20 or 30%, but Norway put a special petroleum tax on top of the normal tax. The total marginal tax rate on oil production was 78%. Do you hear that? 78? Oil companies screamed, yelled and shouted, threatened to leave, said it was robbery, cried injustice. But Norway called their bluff, took off the mask. They knew the geology now. They knew Ekofisk was a monster. They knew the oil was high quality, and they were in a stable democratic country, not a war zone. So they stared down the Americans and said, tax is 78%. If you don't like it, the door is there. We'll drill ourselves. Companies just stayed. They grumbled, but stayed because even with 78% tax, their profit margins were still insane, incredibly profitable. There was so much oil down there. This period, the 70s and 80s, was the Wild West of the North Sea. It wasn't all suits and Excel spreadsheets. It was dangerous, deadly. In 1980, the Alexander Keelan disaster happened. We need to talk about this. A floating platform capsized in a storm. Flipped over, 123 men died. 123 families destroyed. It was a national tragedy that shook Norway deeply. It bitterly reminded everyone that this wealth was paid for in blood, most importantly in lives. It forced the country to implement the world's strictest safety regulations. Today, if you work on any oil platform in the world, the safety protocols you follow were probably written in blood in Norway in the 80s, learned at the cost of lives. But as safety improved and technology advanced, money started accumulating, seriously accumulating. By the 90s, Norway was no longer the poor cousin. They were the rich boss, the boss everyone envied. And this incoming wealth brought a much more dangerous problem. How would the money be managed? You've probably heard the expression, more money, more problems. In economics, there's a scientific term for this, Dutch disease, a deadly disease. And here's how it works. Listen carefully. Let's say you discovered a massive gold mine in your backyard. You became incredibly rich. You stopped mowing your lawn because you can have someone else do it. You stopped cooking because you can order out every day. You quit your job because you don't need it anymore. Suddenly, everyone in your town wants to work for you as a servant or driver. Easy money. Nobody wants to be a teacher or carpenter because gold money pays much better. Why bother? The price of everything in your town skyrockets because you're throwing money around, inflation starts, then 10 years later the gold runs out, is depleted, and now you have no job skills. Your lawn is a mess. Teachers and carpenters have forgotten their crafts and you're broke. This happened to the Netherlands in the 60s, hence the name. It happened to Nauru, Birdshit Island. Research it, definitely. It happened to Venezuela, a tragic story. Norway looked at this trap and said, not today. You can't play this game on us. And this brings us to Jens Stoltenberg, who would later become NATO's Secretary General in the 90s. and a handful of boring but brilliant economists. They realized if you spend the oil money inside Norway, you destroy Norway. A simple but profound truth. If you pump billions of kroner into the local economy, inflation explodes. A loaf of bread becomes $50. Hyperinflation starts in the system. So they did something that required almost superhuman psychological discipline. An incredible decision. They decided to take the money and hide it from themselves. Yes, you heard that right. They hid their own money from themselves. In 1990, the Norwegian parliament passed a law establishing the Government Petroleum Fund. And the idea was simple, but so radical. Every single dollar of profit from the oil industry, taxes, dividends from state oil, license fees, none of it would go to the government's checking account, wouldn't be used to build bridges, lower taxes, or give everyone bonuses. Instead, it would be sent out of the country immediately, abroad. They would take the oil dollars and invest them in stock markets outside Norway, buy shares in Apple, Microsoft, Nestle, Toyota, buy real estate in London, New York, and Paris, buildings, land. By sending the money out, they kept the Norwegian currency stable, provided stability, protected their non-oil businesses. Fishermen could still sell fish. Timber people could still sell timber. Other sectors of the economy continued to live. And most importantly, they transformed a variable resource, depleting oil, into a permanent financial machine. Eternally growing stocks and bonds, continuous income. But here's the crazy part. For the first few years, the fund was completely empty. There was nothing in it. They were using the oil money to pay off the national debt. They cleaned up debts first. The first deposit wasn't made until May 1996. Finance Minister Sigbjørn Johnson made an investment of about $300 million. This is a historic moment. He told the press, "This is for future generations, for children not yet born." Nobody really paid attention then. It was just a boring ledger entry. But that snowball had started rolling downhill, and nobody, not even the most optimistic, could predict how gigantic that snowball would become. Today, that fund owns 1.5% of all listed companies in the world. Can you grasp this? If you walk down a street in New York, London, or Tokyo and look at the businesses around you, Norway owns a piece of them. They even own a piece of the street you're walking on. But having $1.5 trillion in the bank creates a strange psychological problem. How would this wealth be managed? Now imagine you have a savings account of $1.5 trillion. Trillion with a T. You want a new car? You can buy the Bugatti factory. You want a private island? You can buy entire archipelagos. Now imagine your roof is leaking, or the hospital down the street needs a new MRI machine, or the teachers in your town want a raise. You look at that $1.5 trillion balance sitting right there. You can see it. You could solve every problem in your life with a stroke of a pen and still be incredibly rich, but you don't. You refuse. You let the roof leak a little more. You tell the teachers to wait. This is the psychological torture chamber that Norwegian politicians live in every day. Self-control hell. The budget rule introduced in 2001, Handlingsregelen, the financial chastity belt. This rule was genius and incredibly hard discipline. The government would only be allowed to use the real return of the fund to balance the national budget, only as interest. Historically, they estimated this return at 4%. Recently, they lowered it to 3% to be sure. This was safer. Here's why this is genius and hard to believe. Listen, if you spend the principal, the oil money itself, the fund eventually shrinks, melts away. You're eating the goose that lays the golden eggs. Foolish. But if you only spend the interest, the 3%, the fund theoretically lasts forever, becomes an eternal money machine. Let's look at the numbers concretely. The fund is currently worth approximately 17 trillion kroner. Depending on the day and exchange rate, let's say $1.5 trillion US dollars. 3% of that is approximately $48 billion. And this $48 billion is injected into the Norwegian economy every year, poured in, covering approximately 20% of the entire government budget. This means 1 out of every $5 spent on schools, roads, hospitals, and police in Norway comes from investment returns. No taxes were raised to produce this money. No oil was sold this year to produce this money. Free money created by past decisions. Isn't it like magic? Let's look at Alberta, Canada for comparison. Alberta has plenty of oil. Similar geology, similar time frame, similar conditions. What did they do? In 1976, they established a heritage fund, a good start for them, but they didn't have handlingsregeln and, most importantly, discipline. When the economy got tough, politicians dipped into the fund, filled their pockets. When voters wanted low taxes, they depleted the fund to subsidize the budget, melted it. Today, Norway's fund is worth over $1.5 trillion. Alberta's fund is worth approximately $16 billion. The difference isn't geology. The difference isn't luck. The difference is a country losing because they couldn't have the very good discipline of saying no to itself repeatedly for 40 years, not heeding warnings. Norway brands itself as the poster child for the Green Revolution, boasts about it. If you visit Oslo, the air is clean, you can breathe, everything is electric, conventional. They have the world's highest concentration of electric vehicles per capita. In 2023, over 80% of new cars sold in Norway were fully electric. This is incredible. Teslas are as common on the streets as Toyota Corollas in the US. They power their homes almost entirely with hydroelectric dams, clean energy. They recycle everything, and they do it fanatically. They preach to the world about sustainability at UN climate summits, sermonize. But wait a second, where did the money for those Teslas come from? Where did the subsidies for those wind farms come from? They sell oil and gas to Germany, Britain, and France. They take the money, go home, eat organic salad, and drive electric cars. This is the green paradox, a contradiction. The Norwegian government knows this. They're aware. This is a source of great cognitive dissonance, guilt. There's a huge debate in Norway right now. Should we stop drilling, stop extracting oil? Environmentalists say, yes, we're profiting from the planet's destruction. We're guilty. We must close the tap immediately. Economists and major parties say, hold on, calm down. If we stop selling gas to Europe, who fills the void? Tell me, Russia, Qatar, coal? Isn't it better for Europe to get democratic clean gas from Norway instead of dictator gas from Putin? This argument gained great weight after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It changed the game. Suddenly, Norway wasn't just an oil trader anymore. They were the savior of Europe's energy security, heroes. As Russia shut down gas pipelines, Norway opened production to the max, maximized it. They made very high amounts of money. Estimates say they made more in 2022 alone than in several previous years. They were labeled and criticized as war profiteers by some critics. The Polish prime minister even suggested and demanded that Norway should share excess profits. But Norway politely refused, said no. But the guilt continues. Consciences aren't at ease. To alleviate this guilt, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Oil Fund, even became an activist investor, an interesting transformation. The fund has an ethics council, a group made up of philosophers and lawyers who decide where this money cannot go, making moral guardians. They don't just care about profit, they care about morality too. Companies making nuclear weapons are excluded. Companies producing tobacco are blacklisted. Companies using child labor are banned. Companies causing serious environmental damage are banned. Unforgivable. The fund blacklisted and removed Walmart for labor rights issues, Boeing for nuclear weapons production, and massive mining holding companies. When Norway bans a company, it sends shockwaves through the financial world, causes earthquakes. It's not just money. Losing a multi-billion-dollar investor hurts, but reputation is more important, like being kicked out of the club, a stigma. Other investors look at the ban and think, wow, if Norway thinks they're too dirty, maybe we should sell too. Maybe they're right. There's an old saying, hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. That's the cycle. Norway is currently in the good times phase. In comfort, and cracks are starting to show. Problems, when you have a safety net made of solid gold diamonds, the fear of falling disappears completely. And without fear, sometimes work ethic also disappears. Motivation ends. Here's a shocking statistic. Norway has one of the highest sick leave absenteeism rates in the world. Think about this. If you report sick in Norway, you get 100% of your salary from day one for up to a year. Full. There's no financial penalty for not working. In fact, the social welfare system is so good that there's a slang verb in Norway. Knave. NAV's Norwegian Labor and Welfare Administration. Knave means living off state benefits, exploiting the system. You hear young people joking, I don't want to study, I'll just knave for a year, let the state feed me. This is a nightmare scenario for the older generation. For the herring and potato eaters, they look at the young generation and see softness, fragility, people who have forgotten struggle, who don't know hunger. The oil industry pays so well that it sucks talent from every other sector, attracts them. Why would you be a teacher, nurse, or entrepreneur when you can be an assistant petroleum engineer making $100,000 right out of school? It's not logical. This kills innovation, creativity. Norway produces very few unicorn startups compared to Sweden. Very few. Sweden gave us Spotify, IKEA, Skype, Minecraft, created giants. Norway gave us oil and a really good browser Opera, but mostly oil, only dealt with oil. The fear is when oil finally runs out, and it will definitely, that Norway will be left with a population that has forgotten how to struggle. They'll be a nation of trust fund kids and won't know how to change a tire. Basic skills will be lost, but to their credit, they're aware of this. They're alert. The debate in Norway isn't just about money anymore. It's about work ethic, about character. They're constantly adjusting the rules, balancing, trying to find the delicate balance between taking care of people and spoiling them. This is the ultimate first world problem and complaint. Help, my life is too safe. There's no risk. So, what did we learn from all this? How did a frozen granite strip become the richest nation on Earth? What's the secret? It wasn't just luck, no. Yes, finding oil was lucky, definitely. It was the winning lottery ticket. But look at lottery winners in your own country. People who win Powerball. 70% go broke within a few years, go bankrupt. They buy the mansion, get addicted, and eventually lose it all. All of it. Norway won the lottery, but they didn't act like lottery winners. They were different. They acted like a paranoid accountant, disciplined. They got rich because of 3 specific decisions, 3 critical decisions. 1. Sovereignty. They had the courage to tell big American companies, we own this. You work for us. 2. Discipline. They refused to spend the money on themselves today. They saved it for the future, for people not yet born. 3. Trust. They built a system where the people trusted the government not to steal the money, and the government trusted experts to manage it. They were transparent. That's the secret, the formula, not oil. Trust. In most countries, if the government said we'll put all the money in a fund and not touch it, the people would revolt, rise up. They'd say you're lying, you'll steal it. They would never believe it. But in Norway, they said, okay, sounds logical. They trusted. Norway's lesson isn't about geology, friends. It's about character, about culture. It teaches us that the greatest resource a nation can have isn't buried underground. No, it teaches us it's buried in the minds and culture of its people. Norway is rich because they realized the oil didn't belong to them. They understood. It belongs to the nation's history, past, present, and future. 3 dimensions. They're just temporary guardians, custodians. And as long as they remember this, as long as they're not too lazy, too soft, or too greedy, they'll remain kings of the North, keep their throne. But if one day they decide to spend it all, this will be epic. Now think, if your country faced such an opportunity, what would they do? Could your politicians show this discipline? Or would they promise and distribute everything at the first election? Ask yourself this question. And when you find the answer, you'll understand how truly extraordinary Norway is, because human nature is greedy, impatient, wants instant gratification. But Norway has been waiting for half a century, saving, protecting, and perhaps the most important lesson is this. True wealth isn't in spending money, it's in having the power not to spend it. Now go and share this story with others, because the world must learn this lesson. Every country that finds oil today must study the Norwegian model. Be Venezuela or be Norway. The choice is yours, but the knowledge is now yours. See you.